rebuffing weeks of pressure from Democrats to step aside after a disastrous debate performance on June 27th, saying at one point that only the Lord Almighty could convince him to go. U.S. President Joe Biden explained his abrupt departure from the 2024 presidential race in a televised national address from the White House. U.S. President Joe Biden cited his concerns about the future of U.S. democracy and said that he was stepping aside to allow a new generation to take over.
I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation.
In his 11-minute speech, Biden again alluded to the threat that he believes Donald Trump poses to America's democracy and said that defense of democracy is more important than any other title.
I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think it's more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. We can never forget that. And I never have.
In a signal perhaps to the Democrats, Biden once again signaled his unwavering support for Vice President Kamala Harris.
In just a few months, the American people will choose the course of America's future. I made my choice. I've made my views known. I would like to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and a leader for our country.
Countering the Republican narrative that he is going to be a lame duck president for the remainder of his term, Biden listed out his priorities, including defending the right to vote and right to choose.
We'll keep rallying a coalition of proud nations to stop Putin from taking over Ukraine and doing more damage. We'll keep NATO stronger, and I'll make it more powerful and more united than any time in all of our history. I'll keep doing the same for our allies in the Pacific. You know, when I came to office, the conventional wisdom was that China would inevitably surpass the United States. That's not the case anymore. And I'm going to keep working to end the war in Gaza, bring home all the hostages, and bring peace and security to the Middle East and end this war. We're also working around the clock to bring home Americans being unjustly detained all around the world.
Biden will conclude his White House tenure on January 20th, 2025 as the oldest American president when he will have already turned 82. DD India. All right, DD India's Benji Hyers joins us with more from Washington. Benji, good morning. Now, apart from his take that he is doing this for the sake of democracy, Biden also countered allegations of being a lame duck president for the remainder of his term. What do you think his decision to step aside has diminished his authority any bit, Benji?
Well, it's difficult to say because ultimately President Biden perhaps intentionally did not go into incredible detail about why he's taken this choice to withdraw from the 2024 race. Obviously, it comes off the back of that disastrous presidential debate weeks ago. There was the fall in the polls combined with the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, concerns over his age, mental acuity, fitness for office, health, and the most recent bout of COVID-19. Those weren't mentioned. For him, it was this broader idea about passing on the mantle, being that bridge to a new generation, which he'd promised when he first came to office in 2020. He's only realised it at the 11th hour that that move might be needed in order to try to defeat Donald Trump. He attempted to instill confidence in the remainder of his term by pointing to his list of accomplishments in regard to taking America out of the pit that it found itself in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, the division in the country following the assault on American democracy with the January 6, 2021 insurrection, incited from the claims of electoral fraud in the 2020 vote. And he also pointed towards what changes he could continue to make while still serving in the Oval Office in regard to civil rights, in regard to climate change, in regard to foreign policy, in regard to countering political violence and gun violence. But ultimately, I think this was for him trying to protect the legacy that he was, which was so precious to him and is so precious to every political figure. This was a chance, his first opportunity really, to set out how he will be remembered after he leaves the White House, whilst explaining to the American voters that whilst he has, in his eyes, fought for democracy in past years and in fact during his entire 50 years of public service, that issue is back on the line again in this election and is at stake, and therefore he has urged his voters to stand by his vice president, his number two, who has taken his place at the top of the ticket come November.
All right, Benji, also Biden made an interesting remark during the address that for all what he achieved, he deserved a second term. This, in fact, really tells us how it has been for him to take this decision to step aside, isn't it?
Yeah, he feels that the job still has to be done. That was a claim that had been made consistently by him, was reiterated tonight. It's something the White House has maintained. But ultimately he feels now, or at least he's been pressured to feel, that the mission to achieve the rest of his agenda can be best fulfilled through beating Donald Trump. And the way that the race was going, it seemed inevitable that he would have to step aside for a younger contender, in this case Kamala Harris, who has all but sealed the nomination and will likely face off against the former president in the November vote. And it will be up to the American public to decide on the direction that they want to take. Is it to see through Joe Biden's agenda, which he would have liked to have fulfilled himself, or is it to return to the presidency of Donald Trump?
All right, Benji, Biden also mentioned reforms of the Supreme Court. Now, last few weeks, some decisions by the court have triggered muted and not so muted reactions by the Democrats. What exactly do you think he was referring to?
Well, this is centered in the idea that the Supreme Court, which is the third pillar of American democracy, alongside the executive, which is the White House, the legislature, which is Congress, the Supreme Court is the judiciary, supposed to be one of the checks and balances in this system, but ultimately it has become a major obstacle for many of the Democratic Party's aims, given the ideological bend of the court in favour of conservative policies and Donald Trump's agenda. And what that has meant is that there has been a vast change during Joe Biden's administration to things like abortion rights. There have been historic rulings in favor of Donald Trump and related to presidential immunity. And Joe Biden feels that one of the lasting legacies that he might be able to leave on the country is a reformed court where it no longer holds such political sway. Realistically, that's going to be very difficult to achieve when you consider the fact that the current makeup of Congress is so tightly fought between the two major parties. There is not an overwhelming consensus to expand the court. There may indeed be discussions about pushing some of the older justices to retire so that the incumbent Joe Biden, whilst he is still incumbent, can try to secure a replacement and not end up in the situation that happened in the last election where Donald Trump came to power and installed 3 justices to the bench.
All right, Benji, we leave it here. Thank you for joining in with those details.